Exam stress is something that everybody who's been in school has probably experienced at one point or another. As you get into higher education, the financial commitment made only adds to what's at stake with each test taken, since failing tends to have heavier consequences at this point. As an engineering student, I can say that more often than not, my classes have at least one test worth 25% or more of my grade in the entire class. I've also experienced my fair share of anxiety leading up to these tests, knowing that each gap in knowledge or mistake I make can cost me unsettling portions of my entire grade. Extremely high weight assessments are harmful to students who, both mentally and academically, and the USC Faculty Senate should impose an upper limit of 20% on the weight that a single test can hold. Tests that hold such disproportionate weight against the final grade negatively impact the learning experience because they cause unnecessary stress, impact students differently depending on their previous performance, and impair the performance of those with test anxiety. An article written by Jay Fitzgerald from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that the cortisol levels of students can increase by as much as 35% at the time around high stakes tests. This increase in cortisol is one of the key factors in causing high stress in students and all of the negative physical effects that come with it. Many students already have a large commitment, both in time and money, to even attend college, and they have enough at stake in their grades to be stressed as is, and piling insane amounts of class percentage on top of these exams only serves to worsen their stress and anxiety. Not only can your response to stress help or hinder you, but your performance in the class leading up to the exam can dictate whether the exam serves to improve or hurt your grade. An article written by Matthew Frank at Howard University discusses the functionality of exams, particularly final exams, and brings an interesting point to light. He explains that final exams, while mainly serving as assessments, also provide students with the opportunity to improve their grade if they aren't doing very well. This also means that the higher percentage the exam holds, the more opportunity for improvement. This also means, however, that as he notes, that the better you do up to the point of the final exam, the more you stand to lose as a matter of losing percentage that you hadn't already lost off of your final grade. This is grounds for lower test weights because highly weighted tests are given more opportunity to undermine the performance of a student prior to the exam. While it may seem unlikely, students who've done great can absolutely tank their grade on one bad test, while those who've done the bare minimum can boost their grade way up off of one assignment. This is unfair to students and should be minimized as much as possible. These tests aren't just unfair to students based on past performance, they also have different effects on students depending on how prone they are to test anxiety. In an article written by Natalie Spadafora and others from Brock University, it is stated that anywhere from 15 to 22% of students have what's considered to be high levels of test anxiety. The article also goes on to describe how the distress it causes can impair the abilities of students to perform as well as they would have otherwise. This shows that some students already have anxiety when being assessed that can impair their performance, and lowering the exam weights wouldn't eliminate this problem, but it would likely serve to lessen the pressure that these students experience. And the more we can do to lessen this pressure, the fairer the tests become to these people who are affected by test anxiety. One might think, hearing these arguments, why have exams at all? However, one argument for putting so much weight into these assessments is because they can be done in a secure environment to discourage cheating. In an article written by Sarah French and others from the international academic publishing company called Springer Nature, they bring up some good points about why testing is still relied on so heavily. They point out that testing can be conducted in a controlled environment where cheating and other unethical behavior is discouraged and difficult to pull off, thus maintaining academic integrity. This is honestly a very good point, and some professors might bring this up as a defense for the weight they place on exam grades. However, this doesn't justify individual exam weights being so high, only putting the weight into exams in general. Instead of having two or three tests that are worth like 30% of your grade, you could break them up into smaller tests that are worth a more reasonable portion and puts less concentrated stress onto students. It could also be argued that even though they're smaller, the more tests would hold just as much stress or just extend the stress. But I would argue smaller tests reduce the stress more than stretching it out because the lower stakes imply less material to study for each exam and lower stakes to where smaller mistakes don't cost you as much of a percentage of your grade. Exam grades in college already hit harder than high school or previous education without the additional weight because of how much rides on them as college students. Many of us are relying on scholarships or are part of groups that require a certain GPA to stay in those organizations, and having so much rely on these grades makes things so much worse when individual tests can drop your grade by several letter grades if it doesn't go well. Tests can still hold more of the grade and not have the same stressful impact, but putting all of this pressure on students impairs their ability to perform in the way that they're expected to or that they're capable of in other circumstances. Education is supposed to be about learning and preparing for the future, not just getting a grade, and anything we can do to shift the focus to learning while still getting the performance desired is something that we should do. And the USC Faculty Senate should really consider limiting our exam weights to 20% an exam. All right. Does anybody have any questions?
I do. So
Mhm.
you mentioned to limit at 20%. What like is a or hang on, let me back up. You mentioned that most test exams now are 25% of the grade. Like, and you want to have more smaller exams. How for like a normal course, reasonable course, how many exams would you like suggest or want to have in how many exams in each course?
So it's not so black and white as that every class should have this amount of exams and this amount of grades, because of course there's different majors with different content that's structured in different ways. The 25% thing was more of an example of what I would consider to be one of the common experiences I've had. A lot of them are 25. I've had lower, I've had a lot higher. And The it kind of just depends. I picked 20% as the limit because the logic I used behind that was if you were to pass a 20%, like if you were to pass at a 60, a final worth 20% of your grade, it would only drop you 10 points, which could technically stay within a single letter grade.
Thank you.
So are you like advocating for like final grades to be like lowered or like all of the different like tests to be counted as less or just like the like final?
I would say exams in general, it wouldn't make much sense for exams in the middle of the semester to be more than the final. And I feel like the way things go, sometimes if it's not explicitly stated that way, someone might try to do that. So I would say I'm arguing more for exams in general. Um, does anybody else have any questions? Would anybody think that the limit should be higher or lower than 20% for any particular reason?
I think 20% is fair
Yeah, I think
because
20% is very reasonable.
I've had exams that like you said with the final exam is less than I had a class where my third exam was worth 40% of the grade and the final is worth like 15 or 20 and makes no sense. So I think 20 like even it out at least. I think that's fair to have. It's not too many exams, like, like one each week, but it's not so much where it's like there's so much content into one exam. And if you do bad on that, then like the rest of your class is kind of messed up.
Yeah, I definitely get that. One of the reasons I picked this for my topic was because I had a 40% final that is coming up for a statistics class. And I found that really ironic because a lot of what they talk about in that class is how you can't rely too much on one particular instance of something to be
Yeah.
the representative of like the entire trend or population. So he kind of contradicts himself in the way that he like divides out his grades.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah,
you
I definitely agree that there should be some sort of regulation. I like 20%. I think 20% is super fair and 40% is ridiculous.
Yeah, I was looking at that and I'm like, I could get a 75, like I could get a 75 on that and still lose a full letter grade. And that's not even like a 75 is not even a bad grade.
No, but that's unreal.
do you think that having more tests will increase like the stress on students rather than just having like one big exam?
I would say that it would probably lessen it more than it would like increase it because yes, it would stretch out the amount of tests and there could still be room for stress on those even at lower stakes. But if you divide the test out more, they're likely to cover less content and you would have less of a range of things you need to remember for each of them. And I feel like the smaller chunks of knowledge along with the lower consequences for mistakes would decrease the stress more than stretch it out. All right. If nobody else has questions, then that'll be all for me. And thank you guys.